Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of our Battle for Zendikar complete set review. Today we're going to talk all about the black cards. I am Evan Irwin.
I'm Brad Nelson.
All day long, and we are going to begin with Altar's Reap, a black and a colorless instant that has an additional cost to cast it. You have to sacrifice a creature, but you do get to draw 2 cards. So in a world where you don't necessarily have to give up a creature card, an actual magic card that had a creature on it, you can just give up a token like an Eldrazi Scion. This gets a lot better. So that's fine.
Yeah,
that's good.
It's also pretty good with cards like Carrier Thrall or Blister Pod, the cards that we will talk about in the future, that when they die, you get an Eldrazi Scion out of them.
Right.
And it also works well in response to removal spells. But cards like Altar's Reap, I will usually only play if my deck is super synergistic with it, or if my opponent has a ton of slow removal spells that I'm able to, weave and dodge through them by just casting Altar's Reap in response to them killing something, and I just get a 2-for-1 out of the deal.
Sure. I mean, if there's an enchantment like the blue one that gives it -6/-0 and loses flying, then you can, sacrifice that creature because it's basically it doesn't impact anything anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, and otherwise you can just say, well, in response to your removal spell, thanks, I'll just kill this guy anyway and get 2 cards out of it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's decent, but it's not something that you should bank your entire strategy on in this format, since there are cards like Bone Splinters that you'd rather be using anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So Altar's Reap is good. It's not a card you want a ton of, but it's still a good card regardless. Exactly. So we have Bloodbond Vampire, and this is one of the premium uncommons in the set. It is 2 black, 2 colorless for a 3/3 Vampire Shaman ally, and whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So as we saw all of those cards in the white review, if you guys have seen the white review, there are infinite cards almost that just gain a life, play this, gain a life, do this, gain a life. And so when Bloodbond Vampire kind of gets going, this seems to be the card that you want in the black-white ally deck.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. This is just the first pick that you build around. If you get multiples, you just go all in on this strategy. It's going to be very powerful. Gaining life isn't the best thing to do in Magic, but if you're gaining life, getting value out of that life gain, it just makes the game snowball in a unique way that normal games don't really get. Because if you're gaining a bunch of life, it doesn't really matter if it's not impacting the board, but this impacts the board.
Yeah, absolutely. So and it's for free. It's just, if you are gaining life, well, congratulations, you got this free bonus. There was the white card that was the bear that you had to pay a white to put a counter on something. This is just you gain life, we're in, we're good.
Yeah, and it's an ally, and we'll get to it later on in this color. But there's an ally that when it or another ally comes to play, it drains life. So this could come into play as a 4/4 immediately, which makes it even more busted.
Yeah, absolutely. This card is just one of the premier black uncommons, or just uncommons period, for the ally deck. You want to look for this thing, you want to draft this thing, and almost always play this thing if you're anywhere close to that ally deck.
Yep.
Sweet. So we're going to take a look now at Bone Splinters, originally from a Lara block, coming back for the 3rd or 4th time or whatever it is now. Card is super sweet. It's a black sorcery that, as an additional cost, you sacrifice a creature and you destroy target creature. So just like Altar's Reap, when you're giving up an Eldrazi Scion versus an actual creature, it gets a lot better. It is a sorcery, so you can't do it in response like you could Altar's Reap in terms of responding to the removal spell. But that doesn't matter. This spell is very powerful because the worst thing on your side of the board destroys the best thing on theirs.
Yeah, and especially this card always comes around in sets that generate tokens or free value. And a lot of the creatures could become useless anyway. So even if you're not sacrificing a Scion or a creature that creates a Scion or something like that, you could just be getting rid of a card that already lost its power, like maybe one of your early ingesters that now are never going to deal damage. So now they've already done their job, and even if you're getting 2-for-1, it doesn't feel like that because that card has been invalidated in some way anyway.
Right, so nothing's happening as a result anyway. So we have, moving on here, we have the Carrier Thrall that you mentioned earlier. It's a black and a colorless 2/1. Excuse me. It is a black and a colorless 2/1 that is a vampire, an uncommon. When it dies, you put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion on the battlefield that has sack it, add a 1 mana to your mana pool. So this is one of those cards that just, we literally just went through 2 cards that give you this additional value as a result of playing it, and it just makes it not sort of sting as much or hurt as much as a result.
Yeah, it also trades. It's a 2/1 for 2 mana that can trade with one of their early creatures, then give you a 1/1, which could either accelerate you or be another attacker. Work well with a lot of the other devoid mechanical creatures that get +1s or in either direction, power or toughness. So these are going to be just good cards. They're efficient because they give you more than what you paid for them.
Sure.
And it's just a good creature. It doesn't really synergize well with anything. It's just a good card.
Yeah, it synergizes in as much that you still get value when it dies. There's some things that let you sacrifice creatures. It's a vampire, which might sort of impact things maybe in the next set. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But for the time being, a 2-mana 2/1 that replaces itself is still a fine man.
Yep.
There you go. So we're going to take a look now at the complete disregard. A complete disregard for art direction because they literally just ran back Hero's Downfall. Now instead of the hoof, there's the squiggliness.
It just is. If you just put those cards right beside each other, you're just like, really? Like, why is it the exact same card?
Even his hand is like reaching up, just like the previous. I'm like, come on, guys, seriously. Anyway, it could be better. I'm a little disappointed, but whatever. Complete Disregard is a black and 2 colorless instant with Devoid and an exiles target creature with power 3 or less. This is some of the premium removal that it feels like you have in the format, and that you want to run every copy that you can get your hands on.
Yeah, and it's also it helps out with the I always forget their names. The ingesters, the ingesters.
They're the processors.
The processors, yes.
The processors.
Great for the processors because it exiles the creature, and most of the creatures don't actually have 4 power, so until like the Eldrazi start dropping down. Mm-hmm. So exiling most of the creatures in the first 4 to 5 turns of the game.
Right. So, this is it's good removal is a good removal, and as a result, you have the ability to, pick up as many of these as you want and play every single copy that you can get your hands on. Mm-hmm. So we have a Culling Drone. This is a bear, a black and a colorless 2/2. It has Devoid and Ingest, and is just a good old-fashioned magic card that you want in your deck every single time.
Yeah, it's a bear with an upside, especially with the synergies of the format. It's colorless, so it's going to synergize that way too. So when normally, I have played a lot of green grizzly bears in my time, and green grizzly bears aren't even bad in limited games, but this has so many upsides because it's black, so it's a color that usually doesn't have the same power and stats as green cards, but it also has both abilities. So I think that this card is going to see a lot of play in your drone decks, and is going to be a very good, middle of the pack pick. Also going to be great in sealed decks.
Absolutely. So you have Mist Intruder, that is the blue flying version of this, but it's only a 1/2, where the black is on the ground, but it's still a 2/2. So there's a lot of sort of interesting kind of design space in terms of blue got the flyer, but black gets the bear, and that's okay.
Yep.
And it still gets powered up anyway. So we have over here we have the Defiant Bloodlord is up next. That is 2 black 5 colorless for a 4/5 flyer. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So just like we mentioned, you're gaining life like crazy, almost incidentally, particularly in the white-black deck. And while this isn't an ally, it still gives you all of the bonuses for gaining all of that life.
Yeah, and there's just a crossover between the ally and the life gain deck. Or maybe the vampire deck or whatever. And so these cards, I think they're there because sometimes they'll go in one or the other, and then sometimes you have the busted deck that just has all of the allies that are also life gain themed.
Absolutely.
And but this is just going to be top of your curve. It flies, it deals damage itself there. You can start turning your life gain into burn. So that's a great place to be, and it has to be good because it is 7 mana effect. And yes, you have the 4/5 body, which is small for a 7 mana card. But the extra ability is where you really want this. You'll play it and you won't be that happy about it if you have no synergies with it. But when you do have those synergies, the card is going to kill the opponent probably the turn you untap.
Absolutely. Now it's not like you're super unhappy getting your 7 mana 4/5 flyer. It's just that when you're like, wow, my 4/5 flyer plus all of these other things are insane.
Yeah, and what's that one card? The life gain sorcery from white that awakens. Mm-hmm. This plus that is just lethal. It's just all my creatures are technically unblockable.
Yeah, that's
just gain all this life trigger. You lose 18 life or whatever it is.
GG, a good bomb rare that is playable in the deck that it shines the brightest in. Now we have Demon's Grasp, which is a black and 4 colorless sorcery that gives target creature -5/-5 until end of turn. So it's not an instant, but it is some of the best removal that is in the set, period.
Yeah, it's just a very good common removal spell. Giving a creature -5/-5 should kill most things. And Obnixilis isn't the fastest of the planeswalkers, so all of his removal is sorcerer speed anyway, so that goes with the theme. But if it was instant speed, I think it would be a little disgusting being able to like shrink down the gigantic Eldrazi and then being able to just block him with a small creature. So I do like this spell, and it's going to kill most things. And it's one of those that you don't want to overcommit on, though, because 5-mana removal gets really slow and clunked up in your hand if you draw too many of them.
Yeah.
So it's like you want one on the top of your curve. You don't like in sealed. You want to play like as many as you get.
Sure.
But in draft, you're not going to want to be like grabbing as many Demon's Grasp as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you don't like pack 3 want to like first pick one of these things if you've already got one or even two of them. But Obnixilis, he's gonna choke you out, buddy. He's gonna grasp the life right out of you. That's what he's gonna do.
Is that what he does?
Yeah, he squeezes until you get -1, -2, -3, -4, dead. That's how it works. Absolutely. So we're going to take a look here at the Dominator Drone, who is absolutely fabulous. He's fabulous. He's fabulous. Or he's a huge Eldrazi.
That's how it works. Yeah.
No, there's just an Eldrazi on this guy's head and like sucking the life force out of him or whatever.
Oh yeah, just it is weird, and it's like, is it taking control of him because he looks zombie-esque? Like his hands are like this.
Yeah.
So he's not fighting. He's just like, I have conceded to the Eldrazi.
Oh yeah, he's just completely taken over by the face hugger or whatever. And he's a black and 2 colorless 3/2. It's devoid. It has ingest, and when it enters the battlefield, if you control another colorless creature, which is really easy to do, then each opponent loses 2 life. So this card is very powerful in the ingest sort of devoid strategies, but in and of itself, a 3-mana 3/2 is still good, still up high up on that curve, and it still gets another bonus, just like BT dubs, lose some life because I have another creature that has the devoid on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the premiums. Like, this is the deck that the more I see the cards, the more I want to play it. Like, this is what I want to draft first. Like, I can't wait till I get my ingest colorless deck because this is great because it's good early, as in just a beater. Sometimes it'll trade off, but it has the ingest ability. Late game, it's a good top deck that you're going to be wanting if your opponent's at 2 or less, or you're able to alpha strike them. So a very good middle of the line card for the drone deck.
Absolutely, but still, fine man on the curve, smashing in, very good. I'm not unhappy to be having like even multiples of these things.
No, I mean, they work well in multiples.
Yeah, they trigger off themselves, which is fantastic.
Yep.
Now, we have Drana, Liberator of Malakir, and she liberates, son. Let me tell you. 2 black and a colorless 2/3 flying first strike. Whenever Drana, Liberator of Malakir deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Now, note that she's going to deal her first strike damage, and then she's going to put all these counters on everybody, and then regular damage is going to happen. So you get the peanut butter and the chocolate. That's what happens there.
But the name brand.
Yes, not
This
even.
this is the
good
name
stuff.
brand peanut butter and chocolate. Yeah.
Getting all of it. And herself. It puts the counter on everybody, even her. So now all of a sudden she's a 3/4 flying first strike, which is nuts.
And just keeps getting bigger and bigger from there. Like, if Drana deals damage once, she's probably going to keep dealing it unless the opponent draws or removes all that turn. But I just love how it works in combat. Just being able to get the counters on the creatures before their damage is dealt, because there's not a lot of first strike, even in standard. Like, in limited, this card's just, oh my god, bomb, you're just going to win the game.
Yes, this card is completely nuts.
Yeah, but it's going to see standard play because it is just exactly at those stats that is just good enough. I mean, it flies for 3 mana. It keeps getting bigger. It helps out your team. But if you attack with this in a 2/2, and they only have a 2/2 to block, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because it becomes a 3/3 before damage, so then it's just going to kill that creature off. So this card is pushed as far as it can and is going to see a lot of constructive play moving forward. Maybe not exactly right now, maybe, I don't know. But I know it's going to be a player soon. And especially with how disgusting it works with, like, hangerback tokens. But everything works with hangerback.
Well, of course it does, which, as it should, obviously. But, they didn't give you Vampire Nighthawk, but instead they gave you the Mythic version, which is ridiculous. I mean, let's note that she's also an ally. She's a vampire ally. So in addition to all of these upsides and all this power, she's triggering all of your sweet rally triggers.
Yeah. Very good card.
Extremely good magical card, which I always
not
like.
live like a slave.
Nice. Now, Dutiful Return is a black and 3 colorless sorcery where you return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. One of those cards that has been printed in the past, and I've never gotten. Every time I've played it, for some reason, even though it looks like it's all upside, I still feel kind of bad. When ultimately it should be this like big boost that you're getting because you're getting the guys that they spent removal spells or whatever on back, but you're kind of skipping your whole turn to hopefully play more things in the future, and that kind of puts you back more than it puts you ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Like the cards like this are always good at those really grindy long games, but not really that great when tempo is a concern. So it's a card that is decent and still as a one of if you have a lot of bone splinters, a lot of ways to slow the games down, and you want to generate card advantage, or after sideboard against decks with a ton of mass removal. But if both players are trying to play creatures and attack each other with combat tricks, this is the card that you do not want because it's just too high variance.
Absolutely. So it's just not that great. I mean, I can see one maybe in sealed if you have a slower deck or higher toughness or you're working on your bombs or whatever it is. But like even then, again, I just it's never really worked out for me.
Yeah, it's just not that good of a card. I rarely have cast it in the past.
Yeah, and whenever I did, I always kind of felt bad about it. Mm-hmm. So we have Geyser-filled Stalker. Now this is black's really sweet landfall creature. It's a black and 4 colorless for a 3/2 with menace, so it can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. And it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. This card is a beast.
Well, no, it's an elemental.
It is an elemental, but it's also no. Well, okay, fine. It's an elemental. It's elemental,
yes,
sir.
it is. It is a very big elemental.
Yes.
And, I mean, yeah, it's good. It's the landfall creature. I mean, again, they're really slow. It's very much like how they didn't do morph correctly in Onslaught. So they changed how it works in Cons Block, where you had to have 5 mana for it to actually be a blowout.
Right.
And that feels like this. Like Landfall was a mistake for those early creatures, and now these are the fixed versions that are all slow. Sure. They're all pretty powerful, but they're not that push. Like Landfall is not the mechanic of this set. Like it's not going to be dominating the games, but just enough of it to make you know and be aware of it.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, and it's good, powerful stuff, and that's great. But like, again, I think it's in the right spot at 5 mana, and it was in the wrong spot at like 1 and 2 mana. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good, and I appreciate them fixing that. And this is just one of the premium commons. This is a card that I always want in my black decks. The card seems very good. Seems pushed.
I mean, I think it seems just like a very generic, middle of the road card. It's decent. It's bad at blocking, good at attacking when you have landfall, not that great at attacking when you don't.
Sure.
The set has a bunch of Eldrazi tokens, so like Menace isn't actually that good.
But I like the fact that it has Menace, and it's going to be a 5/4 Menace, and that's really strong.
Yeah, you can just block with it and a Scion token, and it's just gone. And then you have to do something else.
Fine.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Lame. I liked it, but it doesn't matter. It's okay. Now, Grave Birthing is a card that is almost like, I don't know. It's kind of it's almost like how do I put this?
It wasn't designed, but only developed.
Yeah, that's the way to think about it. It's a black and 2 colorless instant with Devoid. It target opponent exiles a card from his or her graveyard. You put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion token on the battlefield that has Saga to gain 1 mana pool or add 1 to your mana pool, and you draw a card. So technically it cycles. Technically it both cycles and ramps you, and in the middle of all that, it doesn't do a lot anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to help your processors out because it's exiling a card. It's replacing itself, but it's not like a card you can just cycle in the early turns. Like, you could play a Hallowed Moonlight just in case because your opponent has something that interacts with it. Or there's a lot of cantrips that you can play that have small value, sometimes situational value,
Sure.
but you can always just get rid of them and cantrip and you're done with it. Whereas this card needs a card in the graveyard. So you need to have interacted with your opponent before you cast it. So like turn 3, it's not a 3-drop.
Right. It's not a 3-drop. Now, I can see the upside to this card, which is it not only sort of pushes you forward in mana, it lets you go from 3 mana to 5 mana. It not only powers up, your processors, but it replaces itself in drawing a card. So I can see the upsides here. It just feels like it's so close, but just not there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So, but I like it. I want to like it more than I do.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it should do a lot of things, but it doesn't. I think that's maybe like one of those cards that Wizards prints. Like, they always print a card that they force you to play it the way it's supposed to be played, and it's really good, like the Ulamog's Crushers of Magic.
Right.
And this feels like one of the cards that is supposed to trick people. They're supposed to think it's really good,
right?
But then it's not, and then they're like, oh, so this is how I evaluate cards.
Yeah, this is things that we've learned sort of by playing for many years, where you're just like, I see what you're doing there, and you're showing all the right words. You're showing me drawing cards and making dudes and exiling things from my processors, but I know that I would much rather have a 3/2 or whatever than I would this card here.
Yeah.
So, we go on to Grip of Desolation, which is a monster bomb in terms of removal.
Oh, yeah.
2 black, 4 colorless, instant, devoid, exiles target creature and target land. It removes an awakened land and whatever the best thing they have on their side is. This is a card where I just want every copy ever, always. Just bring it. Just give it.
Oh, yeah. Now, see, this is better than, like, the Demon's Grasp, whereas... Like, yes, this is slow, but it can get an awakened land around the time that something's getting awakened. Mm-hmm. It can exile an additional creature. Even if they don't have an awakened land, you can still, like, maybe color screw their splash.
Right.
But what it also does is fuels all the processors. And so when you're not able to deal the damage through ingest, you're going to be able to find other ways to get cards exiled to then bring them back to the graveyard for processors. So this is just premium removal of the set. Very good. At instant speed, it's a trick. It's much better than... a lot of the Sip of Hemlocks and stuff because those have always been sorceries.
Right.
So I think this card is just unbelievably good. Play every copy you get in limited. Maybe even go into black because of cards like this.
Yeah, this is the type of thing you pick. You first pick, and you're like, okay, I got like one of the best removal spells, if not the best removal spell in the set. So let's do this.
Yeah, it's very good.
And the artwork is just insane. It's squishing the life. It squishes it. That's what it does.
I don't even like. So the problem with the art is that's Ulamog, I think. Even if it's just an Eldrazi, just the crushing. I don't even know what it crushed. I think I see a helmet in there, but I don't know. I don't even know what it's killing. It's so destructive,
dude. I hope
that I don't even know.
I hope it both picked up a dude that was on like a little flying rock, and it just smashes both of them.
That's actually the flavor of it. It's the fists are so big that when it grabs the guy, it grabs the land as well.
Yes, this card is sweet.
I get it now. Yeah, I get what you're saying, Wizards.
Yay. I still love it. I love it, and it's great. So, there's that. Now we're going to move on here to Ghoul-Draw's Overseer. 2 black, 4 colorless for a 3/4 flyer vampire. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, other creatures, not it, unfortunately, get +1/+0. But if that land was a swamp, they get +2/+0 until end of turn. So, kind of a lot to pay for a 3/4 flyer. Which needs like your 7th land, or maybe less because you have Eldrazi Scions. Maybe you powered it out earlier, and maybe that is why this card is not a 5 mana, which is kind of where I would expect it to be 2 black, 3 colorless for a 3/4 flyer with this ability. But now that you can kind of boost yourself ahead by a turn or two thanks to the Scions, you can get this out pretty early.
Yeah, and that's a problem, but it also combos well with the Scions. And we will see that with the set. There's a lot of cards that feel like they're a little bit overcosted, but that's just due to Scions.
Yeah.
The Scions are here to get the Eldrazi out, but not to make all the other cards disgustingly busted.
Yeah, I mean, because when you start giving mana acceleration to colors that don't get it or don't normally get it, you have to balance those out in some way.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Like, this card is going to be a surprise factor a lot of times with just sacking 1 on turn 6 and then playing it, and then playing a swamp, triggering it, giving your team the +2/+0 and attacking with everything. Like, those turns are going to be really disgusting. So I can see why this is 6 mana for a 3/4, and on its own, it's going to be meh. And I don't know how excited I am. Like, this seems like one of the rares that like I wouldn't first pick.
Yeah, I mean,
like I would just take something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those that I think if it were lower costed, it would look better. We would be talking about it more highly. But I think when you start looking at it through the prism of Scions, it starts to become a lot better.
Yeah.
If I play this on turn 4, or even on turn 5, and then use the Scion so I can play that swamp, man, that's some serious damage that you're pushing through.
Yeah, that's gonna be good. I mean, I don't think there is many ways to get it out on turn 4. Sadly enough, there's not a lot of token generator. There's no Nest Invader of the set.
Sure, and they did it on purpose, and I appreciate that. But on turn 5, still, it could be pretty scary.
I completely agree. Yeah,
absolutely. So Hagra Sharpshooter is a black and 2 colorless uncommon human assassin ally that is a 2/2. So a 3 mana 2/2 with a black and 4 colorless colon. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And how about that hairdo?
Yeah, that hairdo is pretty absurd. It looks like she just came straight out of Hunger Games.
Dude, the Hunger Games, maybe Fifth Element, you know what I mean? If you want to bring it back a little bit
further.
further.
Some Fifth Element, wow, yeah. Very, very Fifth Element or Hunger Games-esque. And, yes. But a badass. Yes.
Ultimately, this is a good card. A, it's an ally, so it's triggering all of your rally triggers. But B, it has onboard power and onboard tricks, and 5 mana at the end of your turn, just kill one of your Scions. Or I'm going to make combat absolutely miserable for you, and that's what this card's doing.
Yeah, and these effects don't really see a lot of play anymore because they used to have all the healers that would prevent one damage on board, and
Right.
it would make combat really miserable. And those are the feel bads of like losing a game of Magic doesn't feel bad. Losing a game of Magic because you screwed up your sequencing or screwed up like where the game was going feels bad. Losing the game to an onboard trick makes you want to jump off a cliff and sell your Magic collection, and you don't know which one first.
Just nope, nope, nope. Get in spaceship.
Yeah.
No, 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 no. And just get out of here because I just can't. I can't stand the fact that like it was there in front of my face. It was looking at me, and I still fell for it.
Yeah, and you just didn't see it, and your opponent gives you that weird look. It's just like, well, do the thing, and you're like, oh.
And and this is the scenario where like your friends are around you and they're all going like, oh, please see it, oh god, and then you don't see it and you run right into it and your opponent gives you that like, are you an idiot because of this? You're just, are you dumb? You can tell me, you tell them, right? It's that feeling. It's much worse than they had a trick or they used some special ability in their hand or whatever. But like, yeah, it's a totally different feeling when it's on board.
Yeah, completely agree. But yeah, this is a great effect. It's going to be able to clean up all the scions, and it's just a mana sink. Mana sinks are always great and limited, especially in Zendikar formats where I said, like, with Landfall, you're going to want to play 18 lands because you have all these big effects in your deck.
Right.
So, like, when you run out of things to do, Hager Sharpshooter allows you to do at least something.
Absolutely. So for that reason, I love it even more, and I want to play all the copies I can get a hold of because it's very powerful. Now, Calastria Healer, speaking of allies, it's a black and a colorless 1/2 Vampire Cleric ally that has Rally. Whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So with Bloodbond Vampire, it just snap becomes a 4/4 just because you played it. Every ally thereafter starts draining. It begins to give you kind of inevitability, and while it doesn't have 2 power and it's just a 1/2, it can still block Scions, and long term, like, your opponent is going to have to deal with this guy.
Yeah, and these are the cards that, like, when your early creatures stop dealing damage, that's one thing, it's fine, but, like, that's how it works. But you can ignore your opponent's 2/2 bear. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. You can just play a draw-go game with them for as long as you want because it's not going to be relevant. Even though this is just a 1/2, it's not going to do combat damage even more quickly than a 2/2. But if the board ever stalls out, you have inevitability because every single time you draw an ally, you are getting this ability. If you have multiples, it's even more scary. So your opponent is forced to act. Yeah, your opponent's forced to act, and that's always the bad place to be when you're both in a stalemate, and there's no like trump card that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in multiples, this thing seems nuts. Like,
yeah.
Play this on turn 2, okay, drain them for 1. Play another one on turn 2, or turn 3 rather, and you drain them for 2. And then every ally thereafter is taking literally 10% of their life total with it.
Yeah, it's a pretty good card. I actually like this card a lot, especially in the ally themed life gain decks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the strongest. Now, next up is Calastria Nightwatch, a black and 4 colorless 4/5, which is another vampire warrior ally. And whenever you gain life, Calastria Nightwatch gains flying until end of turn. So you can start to see how all these pieces are kind of coming together, where you have the Bloodbond Vampire at 4, you have this at 5, and then, whenever you're starting to gain life because of all these other reasons, or all these incidental cards that are in white, well, all of a sudden I have a 4/5 flyer for 5, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good ally. It's a good common one when you are missing playables or trying to fill out your curve. Mm-hmm. But I guess it's a lot better than I'm getting credit for because it does fly. It's a 4/5 flyer that's pretty big for 5 mana. Yeah. It's also just gonna hold the turn it comes into play, which is important for mid-range creatures. Yeah. So yeah, this is a pretty pushed ally, and the evasion's really good. I mean, it's good. I don't know what else to say about it besides you'll probably play 1 or 2 copies, depending on if you didn't get any of the good uncommons.
It's a good Magic card, is what you're trying to tell me.
Good Magic card. Great art. Kind of a throwback to Nighthawk.
Sure.
It kind of reminds me of Nighthawk. Not the same position, but the same background.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has the same kind of art direction where there's the cool moon in the background, and they're all lit kind of blue and black, and it's really sweet looking. But again, a 4/5 for 5 mana in black is a pretty rare thing.
Yeah.
And now it can gain flying, and that's even better. So I will take that all day. And we have the Malakir Familiar, a black and 2 colorless uncommon 2/1 flyer Death Touch bat, as it were. So our 3 mana flying Death Touch guy that whenever you gain life, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And that is just another one of those incidental, hey, I gained life, and now you're going to be taking more damage as a result. And you kind of start to see all the pieces kind of come together for that deck.
Yeah, and I dislike that you don't get +1/+1 counters. Like that I wanted, because gaining life doesn't happen every turn, but I guess in this set it kind of does. But yeah, this is going to be good, and it's one of the cards for the non-ally life gain deck. And I keep saying things like that, but there are so many different tribes, and like that's really what you have to do to assess a limited format, is figure out what cards go into what decks when you're building your sealed pools, to know how many copies of everything you have, because the cards are overlapping in so many ways just to make decks playable. And so yeah, I think this card's wonderful. There's not much else to say besides it's going to sometimes get +1/+1 and deal extra damage. It's going to deal a lot of damage, and then all of a sudden when an Eldrazi shows up, you grab your bat and you're like, you stay here and wait for that thing to come over to us.
Absolutely, because, like, first of all, it's 3 mana for a 2-power flyer. That alone is good. That alone is playable. And now we have Death Touch on top of it. Okay, fine, I'll give you a point of toughness for that. And then we have, if you're gaining life, it becomes a 3/2. If you gain life twice, it becomes a 4/3. Like, that's some scary stuff, man.
Dealing a lot of damage, especially with the Colostra Healer we just saw. Like, if you have a couple of those and a Malakir Familiar, you're all of a sudden like playing ally, drain you for 2, attack you for 4. That's 6 in one turn. That's a lot for your early spells.
Absolutely. Like, you just, you want to play all the copies, I feel, this you can get, because at the very least, it's got Death Touch, so it's going to take care of anything that they have on their board. It's going to be able to sit back and stop them from attacking for however many turns. Card is great.
Yep.
Card is very, very good. Mindraker, maybe not so much. It is a black and 3 colorless 3/3 that is a devoid card, and when it enters the battlefield, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard, and if you do, each opponent discards a card. So it's not mana war, and it's not killing anything, it's not drawing you any cards, it's not making any Eldrazi Scion, and it's getting one measly card.
Yeah, this card's pretty bad. I just, like, this is one of the cards, like, I am a connoisseur of Two-Headed Giant with my girlfriend. I just love going to this. We're like 15-1 combined in the last 4 pre-releases.
Nice.
And this is the kind of card that makes me want to be black and playing Mindrakers and Two-Headed Giant, because it says each opponent.
Right.
But it's not that good outside of that. Sure. And in regular limited, you'll play it if you really need processors, but it's not one of them that you really want. But making them discard a card's fine. It's going to trade. It's probably going to 2-for-1 them. It's just not exciting.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's not that it's like crap. It's just that it's not great. And when you're looking at your, like, when you're laying out your deck and you're just like, well, maybe I got a lot of 4s, and you're like, this guy's kind of at the top of the cut list. Because
completely agree.
It's just not something you're really excited about running. So we're going to move on to Mire's Malice, a black and 3 colorless sorcery where your opponent discards 2 cards, but it has Awaken 3 on it for 6 mana. So for 4 mana, they're discarding 2, which is kind of an overcosted Mind Rot, but at 6 mana, they're discarding 2, and you're being able to turn one of your lands into a 3/3, which is fairly powerful.
Yeah, and I think this is a bad 4 mana spell and a good 6 mana spell.
Sure.
You don't really want to pay 4 mana to make them discard on turn 4. You'd rather be playing your spells. But, you love, taking the last 2 cards in their hand. Maybe it's their bomb. Maybe it's their removal spell they're saving.
Sure.
But usually with, like, Mind Rot effects, you're always wanting to play Mind Rot and something. So this is just all in one. You're just like, I get my something and Mind Rot you. And so it's like a 3-for-1 of that Awaken land trades, and it might just trade with someone else's Awaken land. But I think it's a playable sealed card, but not in draft. I don't think it's just that good. I'd rather be synergizing in different ways than just playing mediocre spells in draft.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that this is almost exclusively a sealed deck card, but I think it's a very good one. I think if you think of it as a 6 mana 3/3 that enters the battlefield tap, but your opponent discards 2 cards when it enters the battlefield, that's a way for you to go, wow, like on turn 6, I can get a body, but I can also get some of the best cards in their hand at that point, which I think that's the way I kind of think about this card in terms of its upside.
Same.
Yep. So, and with that thought, that to me makes it a little bit more playable. Now, granted, I still don't want to play more than like maybe one of these, because if you're playing it as a 6 mana spell, you shouldn't think of it as a 4 mana spell. It shouldn't be.
Yep.
It shouldn't be in your 4 mana slot. Like when you're laying out like your mana cost when you're building your deck in seal deck, you shouldn't put this in the 4. You should put this in the 6.
I completely agree. I don't like it as a 4-drop. So don't play too many. Just play one.
Yep.
Board it out on the play if you want to be on the play.
Absolutely. So we have Nirkana Assassin, a black and 2 colorless 2/3 vampire assassin ally, and whenever you gain life, it gains death touch until end of turn. So there are some instants that gain you life, which can allow this to really sneak up on some players, and there's some cards that just say, use this ability and gain some life, and as a result, this gains death touch as well. So, this card's a little bit tricky, but it also triggers all of your allies, which is why I like it just in that black-white ally deck.
Yeah, no, this card's great. Getting death touch is going to be important and just dealing some extra damage. It's also a 2/3 on defense, and if you ever do have one of those instant speed spells, like the +1/+2 and gain lifelink, you can blow out some people with this card.
Yeah, absolutely. So this card, it has a lot of play to it, and at the end of the day, a 3-mana 2/3 isn't that bad, but that ability certainly, just pushes it way over the edge in terms of playability. So we have the big Ob Nixilis Reignited. 2 black, 3 colorless, 5 loyalty planeswalker, +1, you draw a card and you lose a life for Exian Arena, -3, destroy target creature, and -8, whenever target opponent gains an emblem with whenever a player draws a card, you lose 2 life.
So did Ob Nixilis actually lose his spark or lose his planeswalker and then become a planeswalker again? Because it says reignited.
Yeah, I don't know because I didn't care about lore back in the original Zendikar. It was like, these cards are awesome, who cares? But now it's okay. Now he's shining and he's burning up and he's great. I don't know. I've seen a lot of mixed opinions about this card. Some people think it's great. Some people think it's even better than Gideon. Okay, but I don't believe so. I believe it's very good. However, I don't know if it's as bad as people are saying it's that bad, and I don't know if it's as good as the people who say it's very good. You know what I'm saying? I think it's kind of in the middle.
It's very Vraska-esque in the sense that you think it's a lot better on paper than it actually plays out. For example, if your opponent has 2 2/2s, it's not really the spell you want to cast. It works with other things and it can take over a game once it comes out. But this card isn't Elspeth.
Sure.
You want to. People are building Obs on control decks, being we'll just play Ob Nixilis, and I'm like, you used to play Elspeth to win the game.
Right.
Now you're going to play Ob Nixilis. Yes, Nissa's great, +1. You can get lands when I'm to play, and that. But Nissa's +1 is even better than Ob Nixilis, and Nissa's +1 at turning the corner. But it's usually because you play it for 3 into the Planeswalker and then languish or get to react to them. For 5 mana, it's really difficult to double spell the turn you play Ob Nixilis. And yes, it can protect itself from one threat, but that doesn't stop manlands or that doesn't stop, shock, wild slash.
Doesn't that, okay, so if it's not, I don't think it's better than Gideon, but isn't there a sort of argument to be able to play Gideon on 4 and Ob Nixilis on 5?
Yes, that is when you're a glutton and you want your cake and eat it too.
Yes, I would love to do that. I would love to have all of the planeswalkers. I want to play Obzon Super Friends. That's what I want to do.
All right, yes. You can go sit in a corner with Sean McLaren and play all your planeswalkers together because you both love all of them. And I'm just going to try to... Well, I like them too, but I don't want to just... Super Friends, I don't think works anymore because the cards are so powerful. Back when Super Friends worked, it had so many ways. All those planeswalkers off-tempoed the opponent in a lot of good ways, and I don't think that's where Magic's at right now. So, I think Ob Nixilis is good. It's going to see play. I'm not saying that it's unplayable, and I would pie bet on it. Of course it's going to see play, but it's not as good as we want, and it's a role player and not a card that you build your deck around.
Sure you don't want to pie bet on it?
Oh, there's no way I'm going to pie bet on a planeswalker that draws cards. Never.
Right. Okay, fine. It's still very, very good. And obviously, because we're talking about it, constructed, this thing is a limited powerhouse, which you play all the time, every single time, and enjoy it. Now, we're going to move to another very divisive card, which is Painful Truths, a black and 2 colorless sorcery with Converge, where you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to play it. This card just got hosed on Reddit. They just crapped all over this thing. Why in the world is this in a format with Read the Bones? Don't you know what you're doing? Wizards, why did you even bother? And I thought this card was pretty decent, but not crap.
Wizards, why would you print Wild Slash? We already have Lightning Strike. Come on. Rabble. No, Again, I might sound too aggressive, but why can't this card exist? Who cares if it's better or worse than Read the Bones? It's going to be better in some situations, worse in others. Mm-hmm. Read the Bones is mono black. This is for 3-color decks, and Obzon can draw 3 cards. I'd rather draw 3 than scry 2, lose 2, or draw 2. Sure. And I'd rather just draw 3 cards, and so it's fine if it's a decent sideboard card. It doesn't need to be better or worse than Read the Bones, and they don't have to just. not coexist.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and yes, I understand that we're all passionate about Magic cards, but I live in the world where I will try to get everything out of a card before not. And yes, I wasn't saying much about Ob Nixilis being great, but that's just because I'm trying to correct the hyperbole that people have. I've tried the card, I've played with it. Gideon beats the crap out of it. Just the crap. Like, if you play Gideon first, your opponent can't play Ob Nixilis.
Sure.
Like,
Because at that point, if they kill the token, then Gideon kills Ob Nixilis.
And if they tick up, it still kills Ob Nixilis.
Exactly. So no matter what they do. So, well, buddy, you live in a very unique world because most of us live in a world where something is completely awesome or terrible crap that is unplayable.
And I live in a world where, like, last season, I was like, all the decks are practically the same as long as you know how to play them.
Right.
Like, it didn't even matter.
There you go.
And I feel like this format will be similar, except for Gideon is ridiculous.
Gideon is completely nutty, and Painful Truths is a card that you can play, and you don't have to feel bad about it, and you don't have to sit around and go, well, why did you play Read the Bones? Well, because I like drawing 3 cards and not 2 cards.
Yeah, 3 cards is better than 2 cards.
It's weird. It's like it's a higher number.
Yeah, ask Ancestral Recall. Like,
nice.
It's just better to draw 3.
Just better. So we have Retreat to Hagra, which isn't somewhere I ever want to retreat to, but why not? It's a black and 2 colorless enchantment, and like all retreats, it has Landfall, which gives you one of 2 options. The first option is target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, and the second option is each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So all of these cards that trigger on gaining life, love this card, and otherwise the target creature gets +1/+0 and Death Touch. I mean, that's almost like target creature gains unblockability.
Yeah, no, this card's pretty decent. It's the retreats are getting better now, except for the fact that I don't know who would ever want to retreat to this place. It looks disgusting.
The white retreat is still good, Brad.
Well, it looks good. I would rather live there than Hagra,
Nice.
But I would rather have these effects because the ability to get Death Touch means that these creatures are going to deal extra damage, or their opponents are going to have to like do some weird things to trade. And when the boards are stalled up, just every draw step is either a spell that you can play or them losing a life, you gaining a life. So like if a board stalls out, this is pretty good. But again, like these effects, I feel like are going to play way worse than they look in Limited, because in Limited, you're like snowballing to bigger effects, and this is kind of like taking a turn off to get incremental advantage.
I don't know. I think in the black-white ally deck, this is exactly what you want, because the ability to continue to gain life and get all those sweet triggers going, that's where I want to be.
Yeah, but you have to have all of the things that get the abilities from them, right? Like, you have to have all of them. So this card only gets better because you have the good cards.
Details.
Yes, logic. Rabble.
Shut up card is good. Derpa derp. I like it a lot. I'm happy. I mean, this to me is like, if you ever had multiples of this card, it's just Value Town. You know, toot, we're there. Rising Miasma. A black and 3 colorless sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Awaken 3 for black, 2 black and 5 colorless. So for 4 mana you get -2/-2. For 7 mana you get -2/-2 and a 3/3 that will become a 1/1 for the rest of the turn. So okay, it's not quite a Wrath. It's not quite this huge. You know, it's not Drown in Sorrow, which was 3 mana and lets you scry. But it's not the worst thing in the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, if Dragon Fodder and Whirling Outburst are things in Standard, Rising Miasma will be too.
Okay.
Like, you just have to, even if it's bad, like, Drown in Sorrow is obviously better, but if the difference is, like, having the effect that kills the creatures or not having the effect and you die to the creatures,
sure.
Like, I'll always take that side. But even in Limited, I don't think this card's that good because the creatures, there are low toughness creatures in this set, but they're still, like, to get value out of it, you can't have one, and they have to have 2, really. So it's difficult. It really depends on what the decks look like, but I don't think this card is that good. I just think that Wizards always wants an effect like this in every Limited format, just in case.
Sure, and I mean, you could also look at it in that if a Scion made this cheaper, and it's 3 mana for this effect, then we're excited about it. If 2 Scions made this where you could cast it for 5 mana and get a 3/3 out of it, and also wipe some of their board, it's very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see where it goes. Like, again, like, I don't know how these games play out. I'm really interested to find out, actually, because it is very unique. And Rise was a very unique set that was really hard to evaluate, and I feel like this one's going to be the same thing because we have so many elements working together in one place.
Right.
So who knows if this card is good because you can sacrifice your own 1/1s before you kill all of theirs. I don't know. But I'm going to go and say don't put this in the main decks of your sealed pools. And if you draft, you'll know when you should bring it in. But I'd probably start it in the board.
Yeah, this isn't a card that I want to like test out, you know what I mean, in my first seal deck ever with Battle for Zendikar. I would rather say like, oh man, if I had this card last game, I would have completely crushed, and then you bring that thing in.
Yeah.
There you go. So let's take a look at Ruinous Path, baby. Yeah, Heroes Downfall is back.
The bad downfall.
But Downfall is great. So like, how bad does a Downfall need to be to not be awesome?
Well, we had Dreadboard, then we had Downfall, and now we have Ruinous Path.
Yeah, yay.
No, not yay. Bad.
Bad
card.
2 black and a colorless sorcery speed rare that destroys target creature or planeswalker, or you can awaken 4 for 7 mana, 2 black and 5 colorless. So it's not Heroes Downfall, but it does seem to be like a card that we're going to see a lot of in Standard.
I don't know if we'll see a lot of. I think we'll see some of. Like how Heroes Downfall was a 4 of, I think this card is like a 2 of. Because, so like let's just break it down. A lot of people have been disagreeing with me, but like, so here's a game of Magic, right? Okay. Or at least maybe, I don't know how the new format's going to feel or play, and maybe it's going to be way different than Khans Theros block. Mm-hmm. But Khans is still in the format, and that controlled Theros, so I assume it's still going to be similar. And when you were playing that dance, right, you remember like the Abzan dance where it's like Abzan would play a threat, the other deck would kill it, they would play a threat, Abzan would kill it, but then there's that turn where Abzan doesn't have another threat, but they have a lot of answers, so they say go. And the opponent would play something and they'd be like, downfall at untap, oh, I drew something that I can play now. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not possible anymore. So on that turn that you have to say go without a threat, when you're playing draw go with your opponent and you have a bunch of removal, they play something, then you draw your threat, and you're like, oh, all right, well, I have to kill your planeswalker. Now I can't cast my threat, and you all of a sudden got off-tempoed. And so, like, Downfall not having the Awaken, sure, is worse, but the instant speed is so much bigger than the Awaken.
So,
but late game getting a 4/4 and killing something is going to be gigantic.
It's going to be amazing and seems terrific, but, you know, if it's not going to do what it needs to do in the early game, maybe it's not going to be as impactful, I guess.
I mean, it's gonna be good in very aggressive decks that also have decent curves. Sure. Just because you're gonna always be casting, like, this is a great removal spell for like, what was it? It was Draka, right? That's the
Drana.
What was Drana? Yeah, like the Drana aggressive decks. This is a great removal for that because you're playing guys. They play something in your way. You're like, kill it, keep attacking.
Right.
So like maybe a black-white aggressive deck, maybe even splashing Rhino because we can do whatever we want with our mana now.
Because who cares?
Wants to be. Yeah, who cares? We've got good mana.
Whatever. The mana is absolutely absurd, so sure. But, you know, in late game, killing a planeswalker and getting a 4/4 is pretty nuts. So
I've already killed people with this spell where I'm just like, kill your blocker, get a guy that attacks with my other guy, and you're dead. Yeah. So like the card is very powerful, but you can't just build the old decks that played Downfall the same way with Ruinous Path.
Right, you can't just say, I'm going to take out Downfall from this previous list and just put in 4 Ruinous Path and expect the same result.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people just building, there's like, why is Esper Dragon's bad? It didn't lose anything. It just turned Downfalls into Ruinous Path, and there we go. And I'm like, I don't think you understand how Magic works, like, in any way.
Wow. Man, just dropping it on him, ain't you, buddy?
Yeah.
Dropping that truth. You don't understand how this game is functioning.
Yeah, like, come on. These are instants and these are sorceries. They're very different.
Yeah. There are birds and there are bees, sir. And they're different.
Could you explain?
Silent Skimmer. A black and 3 colorless 0/4 with Devoid, Flying, and whenever it attacks, defending player loses 2 life. I like this card a lot. I
do too. I love it, especially when, you know, it dies by Iron Man going into the Aether and blowing up the Overlord. And
right.
Because this looks like it's straight out of the Avengers.
Oh, yeah. This is totally Avengers 1, dude. Like, who came through that weird portal, and then Iron Man has to go and save the world and whatever. And, you know, ultimately, this card is very, very powerful, not only just as, like, a blocker when it comes down, but when it attacks, it doesn't matter if they block it or not, because they're going to be losing that 2 life every single time. So, kids at home, you probably don't really need to block this unless you have to, though it does open up to allow, you know, combat tricks and whatever, or combat pumps in order to pump it even further. So then all of a sudden this thing is dealing more than 2 damage.
Yeah, it's pretty mad. Don't worry about it, like, for blocking it, unless they can giant growth it and kill you. Right. But I do think it's very playable, and it's going to have really good, you know, you can't really deal with the damage it's dealing. So that's really great, like the rocks effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're just losing life. It's not dealing damage. It's not something you kind of prevent in that way. But again, it's a high toughness. It's got evasion, so it can block flyers if it needs to. Otherwise, it's just going to be taking 2 out of you every single turn until you're dead.
But I want everyone to know that this is more of a black-red drone, and there's going to be a black-red colorless themed deck out there.
Sure.
This isn't the card you're going to want in the ramp versions, like the green-blue ramp versions or the green-black ramp versions, or in the blue-black processor versions.
Sure. It kind of fits in that. It's a more of aggressive shell than it is anything else. So we're going to take a look here at Skitterskin, a black.
Yeah, speaking of black-red versions.
Yeah, a black and 3 colorless 4/3 with Devoid. It cannot block. A black and a colorless. You may regenerate it. Activate this ability only if you control another colorless creature. So when you're aggressive, when you be aggressive, be aggressive, this is the guy you want. You want to get this guy on the board. You want to turn him sideways. You want to smash the face. This is a guy that lets you do that.
Yeah, no, this card is super awesome. I like how, I mean, it can't block, but Wizards never lets regeneration block out of green, and it never really lets creatures that come back to life block, but you don't want that. You want this to be hyper aggressive in your black-red drone decks, and it's going to get the job done. Like, it's uncommon for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Like, too many of these things would be completely overpowering, and as a result, when you're in the aggro Devoid deck, this is the card for you. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So next up we have Sludge Crawler, which is a black 1/1 with Devoid and Ingest and 2 mana colon. Sludge Crawler gets +1/+1 till end of turn. Surprisingly aggressive. I mean, not normally. Normally, I would sort of expect this to be 2 mana +1/+0 until end of turn, not +1/+1 until end of turn.
Yeah, and I think that's just a sacrifice to the sacrificial Eldrazi Scions. Like, because they're 1/1s, like the black aggressive creatures for like the both ways, like the black-blue decks that are trying to do processor mechanic stuff, shenanigans, and then also the black-red aggressive drone decks. You really need those early creatures to be able to attack, and this thing should be able to attack with the threatening of the pump for the first couple turns, and that's going to allow to get those ingest for the black-red decks.
Yeah, so like, I think there's a black-red deck for sure. This guy is the 1-drop that you want when you're playing that deck, and as a result, high five into good aggressive creatures. So let's move on here to Smothering Abomination. Now this card has sandblack written all over it. 2 black, 2 colorless for a 4/3 Devoid flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. No mana activation cost. No frills, just all good old-fashioned card draw. I can't imagine this being like not some sort of player in standard in some weird deck that uses, Rally of the Ancestors, Nantuko Husk, whatever. This is the type of card where you want those free triggers to give you all those free cards.
Yeah, and that's exactly where it's at. Also, we're going to get to it is the Blood Artist, or Blood Artist that's in the set, where that's like a combo too. So there's no Wayfinder, so it's really difficult to get cards into your graveyard for the deck. But there should be enough shenanigans that the deck can exist, and this is exactly one of those role players. Like, it's going to allow you to not only attack them, it's a 4-powered flyer. Like, it's aggressive enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to see standard play. I think this card is very powerful. It looks like its stats are just like small enough to where it's like, well, this might not be powerful enough, but it has so many synergies written on it that it's just going to be a blot. And it's good and limited too. I think it's just so fast and aggressive, and it replaces, like, yes, you're sacrificing your small creatures, but it's replacing itself every single time.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I have to sacrifice something to begin my upkeep, like whatever, because I want to get a free card draw out of it, and then every Scion becomes completely ridiculous. Both you gain a mana and you get a card, which is crazy. It's 4 mana for 4 flying power in the air. That's another crazy good upside. Like, this is a pretty bomb rare in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's very good, and we're going to see it in a lot of places. And yeah, Sam Black is probably brewing it up, and him and Zvi are probably going to bring it to the Pro Tour.
Woo! Woo! Come on, Sam Black. You can do it, buddy, for all the
Do it
Brewers.
one time.
Yes. I mean, you know, and this is a deck like the Smothering Abomination deck is the type of deck that could, you know, just run a tournament and hit people from left field and they're not prepared for it and they don't have the right hate for it. Whereas if they do it, you know, if it kind of shows up at the Open Series first, then it can kind of take out the thunder of what that deck could have been doing. Just like Rally the Ancestors, you know, like it just completely demolished the Open Series because no one was prepared for it and the Pro Tour was the next week, and so all of a sudden everybody knew what was up.
Exactly. So I do think that it's going to be good, and we all know about Rally now, and we know how powerful it can be. But it did lose some of its really good early game enablers, and even the new card. We'll get to it in green, but it's colorless green. Reveal the top four. Look, grab a creature or land is a good effect, but they don't go to the graveyard.
Right.
The other card, so that's like the downside to that effect. But
Right.
this is a good spell.
It's a fine man. I like this card a lot. Like if you get this guy in sealed, you're going to love it. And you know, as long as you have basically any amount of any amount of drones that are making, you know, the scions, like you're in good company.
Yeah.
Card is super sweet. Swarm Surge is a black and 2 colorless sorcery with Devoid. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. Colorless creatures you control also gain first strike because you know what's better than +2/+0? Well, first strike alongside it. Hey yo.
Yeah. This card is going to be really disgusting in your disgusting decks. Like if you just get the total Devoid deck that's aggressive, this card's going to be a absolute blowout and limited. It's more of a draft card than a sealed card.
Sure.
Never going to see standard play. Outside of that, I don't know what else to say about it. It's sweet art though.
It's really sweet art. I like it a lot. I mean, I think if we're talking about a black-red Devoid, you know, aggressive deck, this is the card that you want at least one of, if not two of.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because this card can just end games all, you know, like, oh, if you got, you know, all you have are some scions and maybe that 2/2 for 2 and whatever it is, and you're like, yeah, all right, well, we'll do another 8 damage on top of that. And also, they're all first strike now. So, good luck with that. That's fantastic. So we're going to move on to Transgress the Mind, which is no Inquisition of Kozilek, but it is a black and a colorless uncommon sorcery with Devoid. Target player reveals their hand. You choose a card from it with converted mana cost 3 or greater and exile that card. So instead of 3 or less, it's just 3 or greater. It has Devoid. It's no longer really a black spell, but it is a black spell because you have to play black mana for it or whatever. So how good is this card?
I actually think it's pretty good. It's not going to be like as dominant as Thoughtseize or Inquisition of Kozilek or even Eat the Brains, but it will see some play because it does get Obs on Charms, it gets Obs on Ascendancies, it gets, or not Obs on Ascendancy, Jeskai Ascendancies, it gets like a lot of those cards. It can take any of the big delve cards out of control deck. So I think you're going to see this as a card Obs on decks are going to have to play because sometimes you just have to take the cards out of their hand. But it's no Thoughtseize, so it's not. Don't just jam 4 in and think it is. Like it's more of a sideboard card. You can play a couple of them, but it's not going to be the best.
Sure, I mean, and it seems pretty good in terms of being able to kind of get all the some of the most important cards in Standard. This card does take care of, but it's at 2 mana. It's not 1 mana, and the ability to not grab the 1 mana and the 2 mana plays, which means you look at the Jace Viren's Prodigy in their hand, and you're like, sadness. Yeah. So, I mean, like, how good is this in sealed and or draft?
I would play it. I definitely think it's like an early thing. It also exiles that card, so it's going to be a way to turn on your processors, and that's going to be very important for processor decks. So I wouldn't just play it in like a black-red aggressive deck, but I'll play it when I have a lot of the rare or really good processor cards.
Sure. Yeah, and it seems kind of sort of custom built for that type of scenario and that type of setup. And as a result, I think it's fantastic. So next up, we have Vampiric Rites for a black enchantment, a 1 black mana uncommon enchantment with a black and a colorless, sacrifice a creature, : you gain 1 life and you draw a card. So obviously with Smothering Abomination, this is already bananas, but at that point you have a bomb rare out, so like, okay. Otherwise, how good is this card?
I don't think it's that good.
Seems bad.
It could be in some crazy theme decks. I mean, it does let you generate a lot of card advantage, and I might play it if I have a ton of Scion-esque cards, but for the most part, it's not good enough. It costs too much mana to just have such a small effect.
Yeah, I have a feeling that at once upon a time, this card said you gain 1 life and your opponent loses 1 life and you draw a card. But that maybe have ended up being too good in terms of the black-white rally decks. You know, just got too much of an advantage. All right, so up next we have Voracious Null, a black and 2 colorless 2/2 zombie. For a black and a colorless, you can sacrifice another creature to put 2+1/+1 counters on it. However, you can only do so at sorcery speed. Now, this isn't the last time we've seen these Nulls. There was a mindless one back in the original Zendikar, and it stunk because it couldn't even block unless you had a vampire, and it had no other abilities other than being a 3-mana 2/2.
Oh, no. No one blocked back then. It was fine.
Blocking.
People played it. The original morph.
Yes, exactly. The original attack-only morph. That's what it was, which was great. So this guy, in conjunction with like extra Eldrazi Scion that you kind of have hanging around with, in conjunction with a card that might be shut down by an enchantment, like shutting down like your the 1/2 the intruder, the mist intruder, whatever, the 1/2 Stormcrow, where like if they have a big flyer, that card is basically doing nothing. So you might as well just chew it up with the Null and get in there.
Yeah, I mean it's great. Like it doesn't have the finesse of an Antuco Husk, but at the same time it's when there's useless things, it gets bigger and it stays bigger forever. And so you can get this Null bigger than an Eldrazi.
Wow.
With little not much work either. Especially like you could maybe combo it with sacrificing guys and then the Merfolk that lets it be unblockable.
Sure.
And things like that. So, like, I think this card's pretty generic, but it does have some applications, especially if 2/2s for 3 are good enough in the format.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can also sacrifice, like, blister pods and whatnot, so you can kind of continue to be able to sacrifice something twice, for example, for your 4 mana, and be able to make this guy a 6/6, at which point he's legitimately scary.
Yeah, it's a decent card, but this is not the exciting card from Battle for Zendikar. It's better than a mindless Null.
It's better than a mindless Null. It's got some applications. I'm glad it's not a mindless Null because yeah. Anyway, we're going to move on here to Wasteland Strangler, which is a black and 2 colorless 3/2. It's a rare Eldrazi processor with Devoid. When it enters the battlefield, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard, and if you do, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, which is basically enough to kill something.
Yeah, and this is the processor that you want for all of your decks that are trying to do all of the ingest shenanigans and trying to exile their permanents, because when this comes into play, it's just going to kill something, and it's just a straight up 2-for-1. And I mean, it's been a lot of days since what was it called? Skin Render?
Skin Render, yeah.
Skin Render. Like, that card was disgusting back in the day.
Right.
And now we know how good these Shriekmaw effects are, so Wasteland Strangler is just the first pick that you always want.
Absolutely. Now, I can imagine a world where they like had this actually destroy a creature when you processed, a card from exile, and they were like, okay, wait a minute, maybe this should just be a -3/-3 because the card is completely absurd if it does that. So, still -3/-3 is enough to kill a lot of these things, and you see, we've seen like the 4/3 flyers and the 4/3 rares where they have that 3 toughness, so a card like this can kill it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those are important stats to take note of and to be aware of.
Yeah, this is a great card though. This is exactly what you want to first pick.
Yeah. So, speaking of cool cards, we have Zulaport Cutthroat, which is a black and a colorless 1/1, and sort of half of a Blood Artist. It's a human rogue ally, so it does trigger all of your ally stuff. And whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So this card is kind of built for crazy Nantuko Hush shenanigans. Rally the Ancestor says, what's up? This is a card that for a guy who played Aristocrats and Aristocrats Act 2 and all that crazy stuff for so long, this has to be like right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty disappointed to see that it doesn't trigger off of your opponent's creatures, because that's what made Blood Artist so busted. But sure. Blood Artist was busted. And yes, this is an ally. Yes, it has another power to go along with it. But at the end of the day, like, you're going to want to build decks around Rally, and it's going to have some cool things, maybe even like Dragon Fodders, like Northern Outburst. The ability to sack your whole team to kill your opponent is always so scary in Constructed or Limited. And this is the fixed Blood Artist, and Blood Artist was like one of the best cards from Innistrad block for Constructed. And I think that we're going to see Cutthroat decks in Standard.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's one of those abilities that because it's free, it just happens, no matter when it happens. This guy is always a force, and is, one of the things I like about it is when your opponent is low in life total, they're in the low single digits, like, you just want to start swinging all out with your guys, because this guy's triggers could be enough to just kill him.
Oh yeah, you can just alpha strike and just win the game. So like, yeah, these cards are so scary. And early they don't seem like they're going to be that threatening, but in the middle and the late game, this card is just a house, and it can surprise people when they're like, "Well, he's going to attack with the three, two twos, and I'm going to block with this and this," and all of a sudden you just played Cutthroat, and like those blocks don't work anymore because the totals just change, and one life total here and one life total there is enough to actually just swing the game in your favor just with 2 mana.
Absolutely. And also, like, you have all these cards that we looked at earlier, like Bloodborne Vampire, that are going to get bigger as a result of you gaining life.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, there's a lot of synergies. Just sacrificing those respawn, get a mana, they lose a life, something gets bigger. So gigantic. Like, this is going to be a very big player in the limited and constructed format.
Absolutely. I love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that ends our complete set review of the black cards of Battle for Zendikar. We've been having a few technical difficulties, and we appreciate you guys hanging through and watching this regardless of those things. And we've been working it through them ourselves. But regardless, we're here. We're done. We're going to move on to the red cards. So, for Evan Irwin,
Brad Nelson.
we're tapping all the cards.
So you never have to again.
That's right. Ever. Ever.
Ever.
Bye.